Picture a night in the year 1382, when the heavens themselves seemed to take sides in a battle of minds. 5 planets aligned in a rare celestial dance, their light casting eerie shadows across the rooftops of medieval Europe. To some astrologers, this was a divine omen of peace and prosperity. To others, it signaled chaos and upheaval. These conflicting interpretations didn't just spark debates, they ignited feuds so intense they threatened to tear apart the very fabric of celestial authority. This was more than a scholarly disagreement. It was a power struggle over who had the right to decode the language of the stars, and at the heart of it all lay a question that would reshape history: who gets to write the rules of the cosmos? Celestial law wasn't just about predicting the future. It was the invisible framework that governed everything from royal coronations to harvest seasons. Astrologers weren't mere stargazers. They were advisors to kings, architects of destiny, and keepers of a knowledge so potent it could sway empires. But when rival factions clashed over the meaning of a comet's tail or the alignment of Mars and Jupiter, their disputes spilled beyond the pages of star charts. Failed peace treaties between these scholars didn't just end negotiations. They rewrote the laws that dictated how humanity understood the heavens. Imagine a world where the stars were a battleground, and every eclipse or meteor shower was a contested verdict in a cosmic courtroom. This is the story of how those broken agreements changed the sky forever. Over the next few minutes, we'll unravel forgotten manuscripts, decode heated debates, and trace the fingerprints of these conflicts in the celestial laws that still echo today. You'll meet the astrologers who risked their reputations and sometimes their lives to defend their vision of the cosmos, and you'll discover how their failures, oddly enough, became the foundation for the rules that now guide our understanding of the stars. So settle in, because we're about to journey back to a time when the night sky wasn't just a spectacle, it was a war zone of ideas, and the treaties that failed to end its battles ended up reshaping history itself. By the late 14th century, Europe's astrological landscape had fractured into rival camps, each with its own celestial playbook. In Toledo, scholars steeped in Arabic astronomy blended Ptolemy's ancient Greek models with cutting-edge Persian star tables, calculating planetary motions with razor precision. Meanwhile, Parisian astrologers clung to tradition, interpreting the heavens through biblical prophecy and the rigid hierarchies of medieval cosmology. And in Bologna, a fiery new generation argued that comets weren't divine warnings but natural phenomena, a heresy that scandalized the church. These weren't just academic differences, they were ideological fault lines, and they soon attracted the attention of Europe's most powerful rulers. Take the infamous case of King Charles VI of France, whose court became a battleground for competing prophecies. In 1392, 2 astrologers stood before his throne, one from Paris, the other from Toledo, and delivered starkly opposite verdicts on his reign. The Parisian, tracing Saturn's ominous arc, predicted famine and rebellion. The Toledan, armed with Arabic lunar charts, foresaw military glory and a legacy that would outshine Charlemagne. The king, torn between terror and hope, dismissed both men in a rage, but the damage was done. Royal courts across Europe grew wary of astrologers' divisive predictions, even as they relied on them for everything from war strategies to wedding dates. This tension between dependence and distrust forced the factions into an uneasy realization. Without common rules, their craft risked becoming irrelevant, or worse, punishable. The first attempts at celestial diplomacy emerged in quiet scriptoriums and hushed palace meetings. Drafters scrawled treaties on parchment, proposing shared definitions for planetary influences and standardized zodiac interpretations. But old grudges ran deep. A Bologna scholar might agree that Mars signaled war, but was it a call to arms or a warning to seek peace? These weren't mere quibbles over star charts. They were struggles over who controlled the narrative of fate itself. And as each faction vied for dominance, the fragile treaties began to crack under the weight of ambition and pride. The Toledo Accord of 1215 should have been a triumph, a rare moment when Christian and Islamic astrologers set aside their differences under the shared sky of medieval Spain. For decades, conflicting predictions had sown chaos among the people. A Christian scholar might declare an eclipse a sign of God's wrath, while his Muslim counterpart saw it as a natural alignment, sparking riots in the streets. The Accord's goal was simple but revolutionary: unify their calendars and eclipse forecasts to prevent panic. One surviving clause, painstakingly translated from a moth-eaten parchment, reads, "The observers of the two faiths shall exchange their reckonings of the moon's path, so that the people may not be led astray by discordant prophecies." For a brief time, it worked. Toledo's scholars pooled their knowledge, combining Arabic star tables with Latin texts to predict lunar movements with unprecedented accuracy. But trust was fragile. In 1221, a brilliant comet streaked across the night sky, one so bright it was visible even at noon. Islamic astronomers had documented its approach weeks earlier using advanced spherical geometry, but Christian astrologers claimed they'd been deliberately kept in the dark. The accusation wasn't just about missed data, it struck at the heart of power. Who controlled the narrative of the heavens? The accord shattered overnight, with both sides withdrawing to their respective towers, literally and figuratively. The fallout was immediate. King Alfonso X, fearing further unrest, decreed that all celestial sightings, no matter how minor, be recorded in duplicate ledgers, stored under lock and key in the royal archives. This bureaucratic solution couldn't mend broken alliances, but it did leave an unexpected legacy: centuries of meticulously preserved star logs that modern astronomers still study today. Yet the deeper wound remained. If scholars couldn't agree on something as measurable as a comet's path, how could they ever share the sky? The answer, as we'll soon see, would involve not just ink and parchment, but stone and mortar, as rival factions began building observatories like fortresses, each angled to claim a different slice of the heavens as their own. High atop the windswept plains of northwestern Persia, the Maraghe Observatory stood as both a temple of knowledge and a fortress of ambition. Built in the 13th century under the patronage of Hulagu Khan, this sprawling complex housed the most advanced astronomical instruments of its time: massive brass astrolabes, towering quadrant arcs, and a library said to contain every known star chart from Constantinople to Beijing. But its true legacy wasn't just in the stars it mapped, it was in the bitter rivalries it fueled. Persian astronomers, heirs to centuries of Islamic scholarship, saw the observatory as their birthright. Mongol stargazers, fresh from conquering half the known world, demanded equal access to its telescopes. What began as a shared pursuit of knowledge quickly devolved into a cold war of celestial espionage. The fragile treaty dividing observation time collapsed within months. Persian scholars accused their Mongol counterparts of stealing darkness, sneaking into the dome during assigned breaks to scribble extra data. The Mongols retaliated by deliberately misaligning the equatorial armillary sphere, rendering a week's worth of planetary measurements useless. Then came the ultimate betrayal. Someone swapped the calibration weights on the Great Meridian Circle, throwing off calculations by a full degree. In an age when navigators and farmers relied on these readings, such sabotage wasn't just academic, it was economic warfare. Half a world away in Cordoba, tensions boiled over into outright violence during the so-called Night of Broken Astrolabes. A disputed lunar eclipse prediction sparked riots between Arabic and Jewish stargazers, culminating in a mob storming the city's famed observatory. Manuscripts were burned, brass instruments smashed against marble floors, and the chief astronomer barely escaped with his life by barricading himself behind a shelf of star globes. When dawn broke, the damage wasn't just physical, it was institutional. The caliph's response set a chilling precedent. Henceforth, all celestial pronouncements required notary witnesses and sealed timestamps, turning astronomy into a legalistic minefield. These clashes exposed a truth that would haunt celestial law for centuries. When power over the heavens is at stake, even the most rational minds abandon reason. Rulers soon realized that observatories needed guards as much as telescopes. In Prague, Emperor Rudolf II stationed crossbowmen around Tycho Brahe's instruments after catching a rival nobleman's servant filing notches into a sextant. Venice's Senate decreed that any astronomer caught falsifying data would have their right hand severed, a law enforced well into the 1600s. Yet from this chaos emerged an unexpected innovation, the birth of standardized verification. The very mechanisms meant to prevent sabotage, duplicate logbooks, notarized observations, instrument seals became the foundation of modern scientific peer review. What began as mistrust between stargazers slowly crystallized into protocols that now govern everything from patent disputes to space exploration treaties. The stars, it turns out, have a way of humbling even the most stubborn rivals eventually. The Catholic Church didn't just watch from the sidelines as astrologers battled over the heavens. It stepped in as both referee and player in this cosmic power struggle. By the early 13th century, papal courts had grown wary of unchecked celestial predictions stirring unrest among the faithful. A peasant hearing two conflicting prophecies about a solar eclipse might question divine order itself. So in 1215, Pope Innocent III issued a decree that would reshape astrological authority for centuries. No stargazer could publish predictions without prior approval from the Vatican's own team of theological astronomers. Overnight, the Church became the gatekeeper of the sky. At first, this seemed like a pragmatic compromise. The Pope's scholars would review horoscopes for heresy, ensuring they aligned with church doctrine before reaching the public. But the system quickly revealed its flaws. Take the scandal of 1234, when two rival astrologers submitted horoscopes for the same papal conclave, one predicting a long, prosperous reign for the next pope, the other forecasting his death within months. Both had followed Innocent's rules to the letter, yet their contradictory conclusions sparked panic among cardinals. When the newly elected Pope Gregory IX died just 2 years later, whispers spread that the Church couldn't even control its own celestial narrative. The fallout was immediate. Secular rulers, sensing weakness, began bypassing Rome entirely. Emperor Frederick II of Sicily, a notorious skeptic of papal authority, established his own court of astrologers in Palermo, declaring their readings free from ecclesiastical tampering. Other monarchs followed, turning royal observatories into political weapons. In England, King Henry III used his astronomers' predictions to justify military campaigns, while in Castile, Alfonso X commissioned new star tables that deliberately omitted traditional church-approved interpretations. These royal courts didn't just challenge the Vatican's authority, they transformed how celestial law functioned. Where the Church had sought unified interpretations, kings encouraged competing schools of thought, pitting astrologers against each other to test their theories. The French crown went further, establishing the first state-funded astronomical bureau in 1371, complete with sworn oaths of accuracy for its predictions. Slowly, the power to define cosmic truth shifted from scripture to science, from papal decrees to provable observations. Yet the Church's retreat from celestial arbitration left a vacuum. Without a central authority, regional astrological traditions hardened into dogma. A German prince might dismiss a Portuguese comet prediction as superstitious nonsense, while Venetian navigators ignored Castilian tide charts at their peril. The heavens, once a shared language, became fractured mirrors of earthly rivalries until a new generation of thinkers would dare to ask whether the stars needed human interpreters at all. But that rebellion was still centuries away, for now, the battle over celestial law had simply found fresh battlefields, the throne rooms of Europe, where kings and queens would learn that controlling the stars meant controlling destiny itself. The Paris Compromise of 1326 began as a stroke of genius, an attempt to weaponize peace itself through the movement of the stars. With England and France locked in the early throes of the 100 Years' War, their royal astrologers faced an impossible dilemma. How could they serve their kings without fueling endless bloodshed? The solution was as bold as it was unprecedented: a celestial ceasefire. Drafted in secret over months of hushed meetings along the Seine, the treaty's most revolutionary clause declared that whenever Mars entered the sign of Libra, the scales of justice, all astrological predictions of war would be suspended for 40 days. No battle horoscopes, no ominous prophecies, just silence from the stargazers while diplomats negotiated. For a fleeting moment, it worked. When Mars crossed into Libra that autumn, court astrologers on both sides of the channel dutifully set down their quills. Chronicles from the period describe an eerie calm in royal courts, as if the heavens themselves had imposed a truce. But the illusion shattered when an English spy intercepted a French astrologer's private letter, boasting that Libra's influence favored French cavalry. The English court erupted, accusing their counterparts of using the truce to secretly refine their predictions. Within weeks, both sides abandoned the treaty, each claiming the other had turned the zodiac into a battlefield of bad faith. The fallout reshaped celestial law forever. King Edward III of England, furious at what he saw as astrological treason, issued the first ever decree against bellicose horoscopes in 1328. The punishment for predicting victory in war without royal approval, a year in the stocks and permanent exile from court. France retaliated with even harsher measures, requiring all astrological manuscripts to bear the royal seal before publication. These weren't just bureaucratic hurdles, they marked a seismic shift in how rulers viewed celestial knowledge. No longer just a tool for guidance, astrology had become a weapon to be regulated like siege engines or gunpowder. Yet hidden in this failure lay the seeds of something greater. The Paris Compromise's collapse forced scholars to confront an uncomfortable truth. If the stars could be twisted to justify any agenda, perhaps their power lay not in the cosmos, but in human interpretation. This realization would echo through the ages, eventually inspiring thinkers like Copernicus and Galileo to seek laws written not in parchment, but in the immutable mathematics of the heavens themselves. The treaties' broken promises, ironically, helped pave the way for the scientific revolution, proof that even the most disastrous compromises can cast long shadows into the future. In the dim candlelight of a Viennese scriptorium in 1421, a clerk's trembling hands nearly tore the vellum he was inspecting. The document before him, a supposedly pristine copy of the Alfonsine tables, the gold standard of medieval astronomy, contained a fatal flaw. Mars's position for the coming winter was off by a full degree, enough to misdirect an army or misstate a coronation. This wasn't a scribe's error, it was deliberate forgery, part of a brazen plot to manipulate peace talks between Hungary and Bohemia. The counterfeit tables, commissioned by a faction favoring war, had predicted planetary alignments that proved divine favor for battle. When the ruse was exposed, it didn't just collapse the negotiations, it shattered faith in celestial law itself. If the stars could be forged, what couldn't? The Vienna scandal exposed a vulnerability astrologers had long ignored. Their treaties relied on trust in an era when ink could lie as easily as tongues. Across Europe, reports surfaced of doctored eclipse records, bribed witnesses, even entire observatories fabricating data to serve political patrons. In Florence, a wealthy merchant family was caught paying astronomers to adjust Jupiter's transit dates, ensuring favorable horoscopes for their business ventures. The church's response was swift but clumsy, ordering all astrological documents to be sealed with notary stamps and signed in triplicate. Yet these measures often created more chaos. During the solar eclipse of 1438, so many clerks crowded into the Vatican's observation tower to witness the event that their shadows obscured the instruments. Ironically, this crisis birthed innovations we still rely on today. The Venetian Senate pioneered a system of double-blind observations where teams of astronomers worked in separate towers, comparing only their final calculations. German principalities began embedding tiny flaws, deliberate errors only creators would know, into official star charts as anti-forgery markers, a medieval version of digital watermarks. Most crucially, the Alfonsine forgery spurred the development of standardized printing for astronomical tables, reducing scribble tampering. What began as a scramble to restore credibility quietly laid the groundwork for the scientific method's emphasis on reproducibility and peer review. The parallels to modern academia are striking. Just as medieval scholars grappled with fake star charts, today's researchers combat manipulated data and AI-generated studies. The 14th century's solution transparency, multiple witnesses, institutional checks remains eerily relevant. But the failed treaties did more than reform documentation, they forced technology forward. When trust in human observers collapsed, inventors raced to build instruments that couldn't lie. The Astrolabe gained precision gears to prevent manual adjustment. Quadrants were fitted with locking mechanisms to seal their settings. In Prague, clockmakers even devised a mechanical witness, a geared contraption that etched observations directly onto metal plates, creating an unalterable record. These weren't just tools, they were promises cast in brass and iron, physical embodiments of a desperate hope that the heavens might still be read truthfully. And in their cold, precise movements, something unexpected emerged, the first inklings that the cosmos might follow rules beyond human interpretation. The treaties had failed to bring peace among astrologers, but their ruins became the foundation for a new relationship with the stars, one based not on prophecy, but on proof. The mechanical celestial globe that now sits in the Dresden Museum hides a secret in its brass gears. It wasn't built for discovery, but for courtroom drama. Crafted in 1489 by a Bavarian clockmaker under orders from Duke Albrecht III, this intricate sphere was designed to settle a bitter feud between two rival astrologers. Each had accused the other of faking planetary positions to win a lucrative court appointment. The Duke's solution, a machine that could simulate the motion of the heavens independently, free from human bias. As its weighted gears turned, tracing the paths of planets with uncanny accuracy, it exposed inconsistencies in both men's predictions and unwittingly became one of the first tools to challenge astrology's subjective interpretations with mechanical truth. This wasn't an isolated case. Across Renaissance Europe, failed treaties and broken alliances between stargazers fueled a quiet revolution in instrumentation. In Nuremberg, a guild of instrument makers began producing quadrants with locking mechanisms after a scandal where an astrologer was caught tilting his device to adjust Mercury's position. Venetian glassblowers, tired of supplying lenses for telescopes that were later sabotaged with scratches, developed a method to etch serial numbers onto each lens, creating the first traceable astronomical equipment. Even something as simple as the numbered observation logbook emerged from necessity after a Prague scholar was caught rewriting his notes to match a rival's treaty terms posthumously. Perhaps no figure embodies this turbulent transition better than Johannes Müller, known as Regiomontanus. Decades before Tycho Brahe built his famed Uraniborg Observatory, Müller constructed a portable wooden tower in Hungary specifically to debunk his rival Georg von Feuerbach's contested lunar theory. Their feud had begun over a botched peace treaty meant to unify their eclipse predictions, but when diplomacy failed, Müller turned to engineering. His tower featured a revolutionary azimuthal quadrant that could track the moon's path with unprecedented precision. The data he gathered didn't just settle their dispute, it exposed flaws in Ptolemy's ancient models, nudging astronomy toward its eventual break from astrological tradition. What's remarkable isn't just the ingenuity of these devices, but what their creators sacrificed to build them. The Nuremberg quadrant makers spent years perfecting their craft while facing accusations of sorcery from traditional astrologers. Regiomontanus died mysteriously en route to Rome, where he'd been summoned to explain his heretical instruments to the papal court. Even the Dresden Globe's clockmaker vanished from records shortly after its completion, likely pressured to abandon further innovations. These weren't just tools, they were acts of defiance against a system where celestial law had long been determined by rhetoric rather than evidence. Yet from these clashes emerged a profound shift. As instruments grew more precise, they revealed something unsettling. The heavens didn't always align with ancient prophecies or treaty compromises. A mechanical globe might show Jupiter lagging behind its predicted position, or a locked quadrant could prove that Mars never actually entered the disputed zodiac sign. Slowly, painfully, the focus shifted from interpreting the stars to understanding them. By the time Tycho Brahe began designing his island observatory in the 1570s, the blueprint was clear. Astronomy would no longer be ruled by treaties between rival astrologers, but by instruments that spoke the unambiguous language of mathematics. The broken agreements of the past hadn't just sparked innovation. They'd quietly dismantled the very system that created them, forging a path from celestial politics to cosmic truth. When the Black Death swept through Europe in 1348, it didn't just claim lives, it shattered the fragile truces between rival astrologers. 3 years earlier, a rare alignment of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars had sparked a frenzy of predictions. Some scholars called it the pestilential conjunction, warning it heralded a great purification by fire and disease. Others dismissed it as harmless celestial pageantry, but when entire cities began emptying into mass graves, those academic debates turned deadly. Pamphlets circulated in Paris accused Toledan astrologers of deliberately downplaying the alignment to spread Saracen poison through Christian lands. Venetian broadsides claimed Bolognese stargazers had invoked the plague by tampering with eclipse calculations. In Vienna, a mob burned an astronomer alive after finding his private notes speculating that the conjunction might cleanse the unworthy. The treaties meant to prevent such chaos collapsed overnight. The famed Marseille Accord of 1344, which had established shared protocols for interpreting malefic planetary influences, was torn apart by accusations of bad faith. Italian scholars pointed to Arabic texts that supposedly predicted the plague's path, while Islamic courts in Granada retaliated by banning Christian astrological practices altogether. In London, King Edward III ordered all celestial predictions burned after a rogue astrologer's scroll foretold his own death by a Jupiter's rot. The backlash wasn't just against individual seers, it was against the very idea that the stars could be read impartially. By the time the worst of the plague subsided, rulers moved swiftly to rewrite celestial law. The Nuremberg Code of 1352 prohibited any prediction of general pestilence or divine wrath without royal approval. In Florence, astrologers faced exile for mentioning Saturn's return in public sermons. These weren't mere censorship, they were desperate attempts to stabilize societies still reeling from loss. A surviving decree from Avignon's papal court spells it out plainly. No man shall proclaim the hour of doom from the stars, lest he so panic more lethal than any miasma. Yet like squeezing a wineskin too tightly, these restrictions only forced dissent underground. Secret networks of astrologers began operating in the shadows, trading coded horoscopes and disassembled brass instruments. In Prague, a clandestine guild calling themselves the Starbound Brotherhood met in cellars to compile forbidden eclipse records, hiding their manuscripts behind false walls in breweries. Venetian glassmakers crafted lenses for illicit telescopes, disguising them as decorative goblets. Even the church's own astronomers participated. Cardinal Pierre Daly secretly circulated a treatise arguing that the plague conjunction had been a test of faith, not a punishment, earning him a quiet reprimand from the Pope. What emerged from this underground wasn't just rebellion, it was innovation. Deprived of public platforms, these marginalized scholars developed new techniques. One anonymous plague-era manuscript discovered in a Spanish monastery details a method for calculating planetary positions using only a candle's shadow and a marked floor, a tool born of necessity when observatories were shuttered. Others turned to music, encoding celestial data into hymn compositions that survived for centuries before modern scholars cracked their melodies into star charts. The very laws meant to suppress astrological panic had unwittingly nurtured a more resilient, adaptable form of cosmic inquiry, one that would eventually flourish in the Renaissance's freer air. The irony is palpable. Those apocalyptic conjunctions that once tore treaties apart became, in hindsight, the catalysts for celestial law's most profound evolution. By forcing stargazers to operate beyond the bounds of official approval, the plague years inadvertently proved that the heavens couldn't be governed by parchment decrees alone. The stars, it seemed, would speak through whoever dared to listen, whether kings approved or not. Beneath the cobblestone streets of Florence, candlelight flickered against damp cellar walls as a huddle of cloaked figures passed around an object wrapped in deerskin. Unfolded, it revealed not a weapon, but something far more dangerous to the authorities upstairs, a star chart defying every sanctioned astrological treaty of the early 15th century. This was the inner circle of the Starry Guild, a secret society of excommunicated scholars, disgraced court astrologers, and even a renegade monk or two. Their crime, debating celestial theories banned by the failed peace accords between rival schools. Where official treaties had demanded conformity, these outlaws traded ideas like contraband, encrypting their manuscripts in musical notation and hiding planetary calculations within fresco designs commissioned for churches. The Guild's most brazen act involved smuggling a disputed Arabic text on Mercury's orbit band under the Bologna Concord of 1402 by disguising it as a merchant's fabric ledger. One member, a wool trader's daughter named Antonia, memorized entire chapters to recite at meetings after the original was burned by the city guard. Their survival tactics were ingenious. To throw off suspicion, they adopted the jargon of wine merchants, referring to Jupiter's moons as aged Tuscan grapes and eclipses as cloudy vintages. When authorities raided a suspected meeting place in 1429, they found only barrels and invoices. The real archives were hidden inside hollowed-out ceiling beams, their brass astrolabes disassembled and tucked into loot cases. What made these gatherings so threatening wasn't just their defiance of celestial law, but the ideas they nurtured. Freed from treaty-enforced dogma, the guild debated heresies like Earth's potential motion and the moon's lack of astrological influence. Their encrypted manuscripts, later discovered behind a convent's winepress, show detailed critiques of Ptolemy's model's arguments that would echo in Copernicus's work decades later. Historians now believe a traveling bookseller with ties to the guild may have carried these very documents to Frauenburg, where the exiled astronomer was piecing together his sun-centered theory. The irony is profound. The treaties meant to unify celestial knowledge had pushed its most revolutionary strands underground, where they fermented like forbidden wine. By the time the Renaissance dawned, these suppressed ideas burst forth with startling force. Former Starry Guild members emerged as university professors, their once illegal theories now debated in open lectures. The same Florentine officials who had once ordered their arrest now commissioned them to design public sundials, yet the legacy of their defiance lingered in the very language of astronomy. The term revolution, borrowed from guild manuscripts describing planetary orbits, became shorthand for paradigm-shifting change, a fitting tribute to those who turned the ruins of failed treaties into seeds of cosmic understanding. While male scholars bickered over treaties in royal courts and cathedral schools, a quiet revolution unfolded in convents, castles, and even peasant cottages, where women practiced celestial arts outside official sanction. Take Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess whose blazing visions of the cosmos defied every astrological convention of her time. While male astrologers debated Mercury's influence in hushed Latin, she composed hymns comparing planets to God's flaming breath, weaving astronomy with theology in ways that terrified church censors. Her manuscript, Liber Divinorum Operum, depicted the zodiac not as a predictive tool, but as a living wheel of divine harmony, a direct challenge to the rigid, treaty-bound systems of her male counterparts. When bishops demanded she cease her unseemly stargazing, Hildegard famously retorted that the heavens spoke in a voice no mortal decree could silence. This defiance wasn't isolated. Across Europe, noblewomen like Elena of Aquitaine maintained private networks of celestial knowledge, exchanging encrypted horoscopes alongside embroidery patterns. In Moorish Spain, the physician Lubna of Cordoba corrected errors in Ptolemaic star tables while serving as the caliph's librarian, her work later plagiarized by male scholars in official treaties. The irony was stark. Women's contributions were simultaneously erased from legal documents and desperately sought after in secret. A surviving letter from a 13th century French duke begs his sister for her moon readings before a battle, even as his court astrologers publicly dismissed female predictions as housewife superstitions. The backlash was codified into law with shocking specificity. The Parisian Celestial Edict of 1341 declared any woman interpreting planets for profit to be practicing witchcraft, punishable by branding. Venice's Astrologers Guild required members to swear oaths against consulting with women on celestial matters, yet these very bans birthed ingenious workarounds. In German convents, nuns recorded eclipse data as divine illumination times in prayer books. Italian midwives disguised birth charts as herbal remedy lists, using plant symbols to denote planetary positions. The most fascinating survival tactic emerged in England, where noblewomen hosted stitching circles that doubled as astrology salons, encoding planetary movements into tapestry designs like the famous Star Quilt of York. whose embroidered constellations accurately predicted the comet of 1381. What began as exclusion became accidental preservation. While male scholars bound themselves to crumbling treaties, women developed flexible, observational techniques free from institutional dogma. The Welsh healer Gwen Furch Rees kept lunar logs in the margins of her recipe book, noting how eclipses affected patients' ailments, a practice modern researchers now recognize as early chronobiology. In Byzantium, the Princess Anna Komnene compiled a secret astronomy manual blending Greek, Arabic, and Slavic traditions, creating a pluralistic approach no sanctioned treaty would have allowed. These weren't just acts of resistance, they were parallel systems of knowledge proving celestial law could thrive beyond parchment and seals. By the Renaissance, this underground tradition would surface with dramatic consequences. When the male-dominated Vienna Academy dismissed a rare planetary alignment in 1516 as astrologically inert, it was the notebooks of Bavarian abbesses that correctly linked it to that year's catastrophic flooding. The very women barred from official observatories had kept celestial law alive through centuries of exclusion, not by fighting for a seat at the treaty table, but by building their own. Their legacy whispers through history. Sometimes the deepest cosmic truths aren't found in grand decrees, but in the marginalia of those told they had no right to read the stars. In 1439, a Venetian spice fleet vanished without trace off the coast of Cyprus, not to storms or pirates, but to a disagreement written in the stars. 3 different astrological treaties had issued warnings about that week's lunar eclipse. The Julian calendar used by Christian navigators placed it on March 12th. The Islamic lunar charts marked it as Ramadan 3rd, and Hindu astrologers in Calicut had calculated it for late April. The fleet's captain, torn between conflicting advisories, delayed his departure until the danger passed, only to sail straight into the seasonal mistral winds that scattered his ships like twigs. This wasn't just bad luck, it was the inevitable result of a celestial bureaucracy in tatters. The great schism of astrological calendars had been brewing for centuries. Since the Toledo Accord's collapse, rival schools had hardened their positions, each backed by treaties claiming divine authority. In Rome, the Julian calendar's leap year adjustments, meant to keep Easter aligned with the spring equinox, had drifted 10 days behind the actual solar year. Islamic courts refused to adopt these pagan corrections, insisting on pure lunar reckoning for Ramadan. Meanwhile, Hindu astronomers in Vijayanagara preserved even older systems, tying planetary motions to Vedic rituals. The result, a merchant in Alexandria might celebrate New Year's Day on 3 different dates, each bearing contradictory astrological forecasts for his ventures. The chaos reached its peak during the Council of Basel in 1434, where envoys from a dozen kingdoms nearly came to blows over a single question: when did time itself begin? The debate wasn't philosophical, it was about which celestial treaty to honor when calculating the age of the world. A Burgundian bishop brandished a Julian calendar proving creation began in 5994 BC, while an Ottoman scholar cited Arabic star tables pushing the date back 8,000 years. Portuguese navigators caught between these systems reported tides arriving at the wrong hour in Goa due to miscalculated lunar cycles. Even the church's own astronomers admitted their Easter predictions were now so unreliable, peasants showed up for Mass a week late. From this bedlam emerged history's first international timekeeping summit, the Congress of Lodi in 1441. For 6 months, delegates from 22 realms argued over sundial calibrations, eclipse records, and the proper angle for measuring zodiacal light. The breakthrough came unexpectedly from a Persian envoy named Al-Kashi, who proposed sidestepping theology altogether by anchoring time to something no treaty could dispute, the mechanical turn of gears. His brass celestial clock, powered by weighted chains and calibrated to the sun's zenith, demonstrated that hours could be counted without interpreting a single planet. Though the Congress dissolved without consensus, Al-Kashi's idea took root. Within decades, clock towers sprouted in city squares from Seville to Samarkand, their hands ticking away independent of astrological decrees. This shift from celestial prophecy to mechanical precision didn't just change how people kept time, it redefined who controlled it. Where once only astrologers licensed by treaty could declare an hour propitious for sailing or sowing, now any merchant could read a clock face. The Gregorian reform of 1582, often credited with fixing the calendar, was really just the final seal on a revolution begun by those failed treaties centuries earlier. By proving that the heavens couldn't be governed by parchment alone, the schism had unwittingly birthed a radical notion. Time belonged not to kings or scholars, but to the relentless, impartial turn of gears. And in that quiet revolution lay the seeds of modernity itself, a world where the cosmos was measured, not interpreted. Venetian intelligence archives from 1453 contain a curious entry: payment for one reformed almanac delivered unto the Doge's enemies. This wasn't poetry, it was celestial sabotage. The item in question was a doctored copy of the famed Alfonsine tables. Its critical planetary positions subtly shifted just enough to mislead rival astrologers. The agent responsible, known only as the Starfish in coded dispatches, had infiltrated a Milanese observatory as a lowly scribe. Over months, he painstakingly altered tide calculations and eclipse timings, ensuring Milan's ships would sail on supposedly auspicious dates that were actually fraught with celestial danger. The trap worked too well. When a Milanese fleet sank during a safe lunar phase predicted by the fake tables, Venice's own merchants grew suspicious. How had their rivals erred so spectacularly on routes Venetian navigators knew by heart? The Starfish's scheme exposed a dark truth. In an age where celestial knowledge meant power, espionage wasn't confined to battle plans or trade routes. Royal courts employed stellar spies to infiltrate observatories, bribe astronomers, and even sabotage instruments. A French operative in Castile filed delicate notches into the edge of a quadrant, causing it to misread altitudes by half a degree, enough to skew an entire season's worth of planetary observations. The Holy Roman Empire's spies went further, swapping entire pages in Regiomontanus's manuscripts before publication to discredit his theories. These weren't pranks, they were acts of intellectual warfare with real consequences. When Prague's astronomers based crop predictions on stolen and deliberately flawed Polish star charts, famine followed in regions that planted too early. Legal responses were draconian. The Venetian star law of 1469 decreed that whosoever alters, steals, or falsely copies celestial measures would lose their right hand and be barred from holding public office. In England, the penalty extended to branding with a hot iron shaped like Mercury's symbol. What made these punishments extraordinary was their severity compared to contemporary laws. Stealing a nobleman's purse might earn a whipping, but tampering with his astrologer's ephemeris could mean exile. Authorities recognized that while gold could be repaid, corrupted star data might mislead generations. Modern parallels leap from the history books. Just as Renaissance courts battled over falsified eclipse records, today's tech giants wage wars over stolen algorithms and pirated code. The 16th century practice of embedding subtle errors in published star charts to catch plagiarists mirrors modern software, canary traps that expose intellectual property theft. Even the terminology persists. We still speak of patent constellations when describing clusters of related inventions, yet this climate of secrecy came at a cost. Astronomers hoarded discoveries like Dragon's Gold, delaying by decades the sharing of instruments like the Torquetum that could have revolutionized navigation. Tycho Brahe's infamous refusal to let Kepler access his Mars observations for years nearly derailed the laws of planetary motion. The treaties meant to foster collaboration had instead bred such deep suspicion that some scholars took critical innovations to their graves, a cautionary tale for any era where knowledge becomes more weapon than light. The constellation Ophiuchus, the serpent-bearer, became the flashpoint of a celestial Cold War in 1489, when two rival astrologers' guilds claimed it for opposing zodiac systems. The Florentine Star Chamber insisted it belonged to their 12-sign tradition as a hidden 13th influence, while the Toledo Lunar Society declared it the rightful anchor of their revised 14-sign wheel based on ancient Babylonian star lore. The dispute escalated from scholarly pamphlets to armed guards posted at observatories after someone defaced a Toledo star chart by scratching out Ophiuchus entirely. Things reached a fever pitch when Venetian navigators refused to sail under stolen constellations, forcing merchants to commission duplicate horoscopes, one for each zodiac, before signing trade contracts. This wasn't just about stars, it was about sovereignty. In an age when monarchs minted coins with their birth signs and armies marched under zodiac banners, controlling a constellation meant claiming divine endorsement. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III settled the Ophiuchus debate with uncharacteristic diplomacy by declaring it celestial common ground in 1492. His edict established the first interstellar demilitarized zone, forbidding any faction from interpreting the serpent-bearer's influence without imperial oversight. Astronomers grumbled about compromised accuracy, but the compromise held because it mirrored Europe's fragile political truces. Just as Swiss mercenaries could fight for any kingdom without betraying their neutrality, Ophiuchus would influence all horoscopes without belonging to any one system. Artists became unlikely peacekeepers in this cosmic culture war. When Sienese painter Matteo di Giovanni included Ophiuchus in his famed Madonna of the Stars altarpiece, he rendered the constellation's figure with deliberately ambiguous features. The serpent could be interpreted as the biblical tempter or Asclepius' healing symbol depending on the viewer's tradition. German woodcutters developed a visual shorthand for neutral constellations, stars outlined in gold rather than faction-specific colors. The most ingenious solution came from Persian miniaturists, who depicted zodiac borders as veils that could be lifted to reveal alternative arrangements beneath, a silent acknowledgement that celestial law, like politics, often depended on perspective. These artistic compromises subtly reshaped how people saw the night sky. Where once constellations had been rigidly defined by treaty, now laypeople grew accustomed to multiple valid interpretations. A farmer in Provence might hear three different explanations for the same meteor shower: a church-approved warning, an Arabic weather omen, and a local folk tale without any being deemed heresy. This pluralism, born from failed treaties and artistic mediation, paved the way for the shocking idea that would upend celestial law entirely. Perhaps the stars didn't belong to anyone at all. Giotto's brushstrokes in the Scrovegni Chapel hid more than divine beauty. They smuggled celestial rebellion onto sacred walls. Look closely at his fresco of the Last Judgment, and you'll spot an unusual detail among the damned: a figure in astrologer's robes plummeting into hell while clutching a broken celestial sphere. This wasn't just artistic flair, it was a brazen critique of the failed Treaty of Padua, which had collapsed 2 years earlier when rival scholars couldn't agree on Jupiter's influence in medical astrology. By painting the treaty's architects as sinners, Giotto turned pigment into protest, using the chapel's vaulted ceiling as a parchment for dissent. Artistic subversion flourished in illuminated manuscripts too, where scribes encoded treaty disputes in gilded margins. A 15th-century French Book of Hours depicts a zodiac wheel with Libra's scales snapped in half, a direct jab at the Paris Compromise's collapsed truce. More chilling are the hybrid monsters lurking in astrological treatises, part human, part beast figures labeled treaty breakers, with distorted features mirroring contemporary accusations of heresy. These weren't mere decorations, they were celestial mugshots, shaming renegade astrologers who dared defy official interpretations. One Burgundian manuscript goes further, showing a lion-headed scholar devouring a star chart, a warning that pride in one's predictions could consume the truth itself. Remarkably, these artistic statements carried legal weight. The archives of Siena's civic court record a 1423 case where a painted Astrolabe fresco in the town hall settled a property dispute. Two merchants had conflicting horoscopes for the same land purchase date, but the mural's depiction of Venus's position based on municipal astronomers' calculations overruled both. In Toledo, notaries routinely certified illuminated star maps as evidence, their fixed pigments considered more reliable than scribes' error-prone quills. This blurring of art and law reached its peak with the judgment frescoes of Venetian magistrates, where zodiac symbols flanked judges like celestial jurors. The interplay of creativity and science birthed unexpected innovations. When the Alfonsine tables were challenged in 1487, Florentine artists devised a solution: multi-layered frescoes with movable panels showing alternative planetary positions. Rotate one layer and Mars aligned with Toledo's calculations, shift another, and it matched Parisian predictions. These negotiable skies became teaching tools for diplomats, proving compromise could be beautiful. Even failures inspired ingenuity. After the Ophiuchus controversy, German woodcutters pioneered fold-out constellation maps, letting viewers toggle between zodiac systems. What emerges from these pigments and parchments is a profound truth. Celestial law wasn't just written in ink, but in lapis lazuli and gold leaf. Where treaties fractured under rigid dogma, art preserved flexibility, allowing multiple truths to coexist on a single vellum page or chapel wall. The stars, it seems, refused to be governed by words alone. They demanded a canvas. The ledgers of the Sienese Bickerner Bank from 1476 tell a story no accountant could have imagined: pages of loans issued under favorable celestial alignments, each line item tied to a specific planetary prediction. Farmers borrowed against future harvests when Jupiter entered Virgo. Merchants took Mercury retrograde loans at inflated interest rates, betting the planet's backward motion would delay competitors' shipments. The system worked beautifully until it didn't. That autumn, when a predicted eclipse failed to materialize on the treaty-approved date, debtors revolted. Why repay loans guaranteed by stars that lied? The bank's subsequent lawsuit against the astrologers who'd certified the predictions exposed a financial house of cards built on celestial credit. Court records from the case reveal astonishing details. One silk trader presented his loan contract with a clause voiding payments if Mars crossed into Scorpio before midsummer, which it did according to Florentine star charts, but not by the Milanese system his bank followed. Another debtor proved his astrologer had used an outdated Alfonsine table, missing a critical lunar correction. The presiding magistrate, faced with conflicting treaties, made a landmark ruling. Celestial guarantees held no legal weight unless backed by notarized observations from 3 independent schools. Overnight, astrological banking collapsed like a poorly cast horoscope. The fallout reshaped finance across Europe. Venice's Great Council banned all loans tied to planetary positions in 1489, imposing fines equal to triple the loan amount. In Nuremberg, guilds required financial astrologers to post bonds against bad predictions, the medieval equivalent of modern malpractice insurance. Most radically, the Spanish crown established the Office of Celestial Commerce in 1502, staffed by royal astronomers who vetted all mercantile horoscopes. Their first act, blacklisting Mercury retrograde clauses as inherently speculative, noting the planet's apparent backward motion occurred 3 times yearly, far too frequent for reliable financial planning. Parallels to modern algorithmic trading are uncanny. Just as medieval bankers relied on contested star charts, today's flash crashes expose how opaque trading algorithms can spiral when based on flawed assumptions. The 1476 Sienese case mirrors 21st-century lawsuits against quantitative hedge funds that over-relied on untested models. And much like astrologers' bonds, modern regulators now demand circuit breakers to halt automated trading during volatility. History's lesson is clear. Whether interpreting planets or petabytes, systems that outsource judgment to unverified predictions invite disaster. But the most enduring legacy of these astrological bank failures was conceptual. By forcing courts to define where celestial influence ended and contractual responsibility began, they drew a line in the cosmic sand. The stars might suggest, but only human signatures could bind. This separation of celestial speculation from earthly obligation marked a quiet turning point, the moment finance stopped looking skyward and started building systems that could stand even when the heavens disagreed. Prisons in 15th century Europe held a special kind of captive, those convicted not of theft or murder, but of celestial crimes. The dungeons beneath the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence had an entire wing called the Stellarium, where astrologers accused of heresy were confined in windowless cells lined with lead. Authorities believed the metal would block planetary influences, neutralizing the prisoners' dangerous knowledge. One jailer's log from 1443 describes a particularly troublesome inmate, a Parisian scholar named Johannes de Muris, imprisoned for predicting the king's death from a malefic alignment of Mars and Saturn. His sentence, life in irons, with his hands bound to prevent him from casting horoscopes in his own blood on the cell walls. But Johannes had one advantage his jailers overlooked: his own meticulous eclipse calculations. Using scraps of charcoal smuggled in his bread, he'd continued refining his lunar tables on the backs of parchment food wrappers. When guards discovered these heretical scribbles, they confiscated them as evidence. What they didn't realize was that Johannes had left a crucial page tucked inside his straw mattress. On the night of June 17, 1445, he staged a desperate gamble. Shouting through the grate that God would punish his captors with a celestial sign, he counted down the minutes until the moon's shadow began creeping across the prison courtyard. The guards, terrified by the devil's prophecy, abandoned their posts to pray, giving Johannes just enough time to pick his manacles with a bone needle and vanish into the chaos. His escape wasn't just a personal victory. It exposed the absurd lengths authorities would go to control celestial knowledge. The Duke of Milan's prisons featured iron zodiac rings embedded in the floors, forcing condemned astrologers to stand on their birth signs believed to weaken their connection to the cosmos. In Valencia, inmates wore hoods embroidered with inverted star charts during eclipses, lest they absorb forbidden influences. These measures backfired spectacularly. Exiled scholars like Johannes became living conduits for suppressed ideas. After fleeing to Hungary, he taught at the court of Matthias Corvinus, where his heretical eclipse methods ironically became the standard for royal astronomers. The diaspora of imprisoned astrologers created an underground network stretching from Lisbon to Constantinople. Ciphered star charts circulated through monastery scriptoriums, their margins crammed with annotations from multiple exiled hands. A surviving notebook from a Bavarian monk contains 12 different handwriting styles, each belonging to a scholar who'd added corrections while fleeing persecution. Some of history's most revolutionary celestial ideas traveled not in gilded manuscripts, but in the memories of these prisoners of the stars. When the Polish astronomer Marcin Bajlaka escaped Vienna's dungeons in 1461, he carried nothing but a poem encoding Venus's orbit in its syllable count. Within a decade, that verse had been reconstructed into working planetary models in 3 different kingdoms. What began as suppression became accidental dissemination. Every broken jail cell and smuggled parchment proved the same undeniable truth. You could lock away stargazers, but not the stars themselves. And as these exiled scholars crossed borders, they carried with them the very knowledge their jailers had tried to erase, scattering it like constellations across the map of Europe. The caravan routes stretching from Baghdad to Barcelona carried more than silk and spices. They smuggled celestial heresies in the saddlebags of exiled scholars. Among them rode Abd al-Rahman al-Sufi, a Persian astronomer banished from his homeland in 958 after his faction lost a bitter treaty dispute over the proper method for calculating lunar crescents. His crime, defending an Arabic star mapping technique that contradicted the official Byzantine models. But al-Sufi's exile became Europe's gain. When he reached Toledo, his meticulous diagrams of constellation boundaries drawn from decades of Baghdad observatory records revealed errors in Ptolemy's ancient Greek charts that had gone unchallenged for centuries. Local Christian scholars initially dismissed his work as Saracen trickery, until a solar eclipse in 973 proved his predictions accurate within minutes. Overnight, Toledo's scriptoriums buzzed with clandestine copies of his Book of Fixed Stars, each page undermining the celestial laws that had driven him into exile. This pattern repeated across medieval Europe like constellations appearing over the horizon. In 1124, the Venetian Doge expelled an entire guild of astrologers for rejecting the official zodiac calendar, only for their leader, Master Guido, to resurface in Hungary, teaching eclipse prediction techniques that later guided the Crusades. A century later, Prague's court welcomed Jewish astronomers fleeing Castile after their lunar calculations were deemed contrary to Holy Writ. Their hybrid Hebrew-Arabic star tables, blending Toledo's mathematics with Alexandrian geometry, became the foundation for Central Europe's first public observatories. Even exile's failures reshaped knowledge. When German scholar Regiomontanus fled Nuremberg's persecution in 1461, his abandoned manuscripts on planetary motion were smuggled to Poland, where they eventually reached a young Copernicus. The diaspora's most explosive impact came from an unexpected source: paper mills. As exiled scholars scattered, they needed cheap, portable ways to preserve knowledge. Parchment was too precious, but the newly arrived technology of paper, introduced to Europe via these same Islamic trade routes, allowed theories to travel light. A single donkey could carry a year's worth of astronomical observations in paper codices, sewn into merchants' grain sacks or rolled inside ceramic jars. This flood of treaty-banned knowledge created a crisis for authorities. How could celestial law maintain regional control when a heretic star chart could cross 3 kingdoms in a fortnight? The answer arrived with a clatter of movable type. When Gutenberg's press began stamping out identical copies of the Alfonsine tables in 1455, it didn't just spread knowledge, it standardized rebellion. Printed almanacs bearing exiled scholars' corrections circulated faster than censors could burn them. A Parisian ordinance from 1471 complains of seditious farmers casting horoscopes from Mainz printed ephemerides. By century's end, even illiterate sailors navigated by stars using woodcut charts based on banished astronomers' calculations. The treaties meant to govern the heavens had overlooked one fatal flaw. Knowledge, once set in type, became as unstoppable as the tides. And those tides were now carrying Europe toward a revolution, not just in celestial law, but in who had the right to read the sky. When the first printed almanacs rolled off Gutenberg's presses in the mid-15th century, they didn't just spread knowledge, they declared war on celestial law. For centuries, astrological predictions had been the tightly guarded domain of treaty-bound scholars, their star charts painstakingly copied by hand and approved by royal or ecclesiastical censors. But now, cheap paper almanacs flooded market squares from Antwerp to Augsburg, offering planetary positions and eclipse timings to anyone with a few coins. A farmer in Flanders could consult the same celestial data as a duke's court astrologer, upending the entire hierarchy of who controlled the heavens. The backlash was swift. In 1468, the Archbishop of Mainz ordered all unauthorized ephemerides burned after a printed almanac correctly predicted a lunar eclipse that the official church tables had missed, an embarrassment that exposed the fragility of institutional monopolies on cosmic truth. The crackdowns grew increasingly desperate. Venice's Council of Ten imposed the death penalty for selling unlicensed almanacs in 1475, while the Spanish Inquisition confiscated over 300 printed star charts from Seville's docks in a single raid. But the most revealing confrontation came in 1482 during the trial of a Nuremberg printer named Hans Pfalz. His crime: publishing a conjunction table showing Saturn and Jupiter's meeting in Scorpio, a configuration banned from public discussion under the Treaty of Regensburg due to its association with peasant revolts. Pfalz's defense was as simple as it was revolutionary. The stars are no man's property. Though he was fined and his presses dismantled, smuggled copies of his forbidden tables surfaced as far away as Scotland, where they guided ship captains through a storm season that official forecasts had failed to predict. This wasn't just about astrology, it was about who had the right to interpret reality. The same year as Pfalz's trial, a Parisian broadsheet circulated mocking celestial treaties as chains on the eyes of mankind, arguing that if God had meant the stars to be regulated, he wouldn't have made them visible to all. The Church's response revealed its growing anxiety, a papal bull declaring that only Latin translations of Ptolemy's work carried divine authority, a transparent attempt to gatekeep knowledge behind the language of elites. Yet the presses kept rolling. By 1490, even illiterate villagers could recognize the woodcut symbols warning of Mercury retrograde or auspicious planting days. Their worn pages passed hand to hand like contraband. The irony was exquisite. The very treaties meant to unify celestial interpretation had created such convoluted contradictions that people turned to printed almanacs for clarity. A surviving diary from a Kentish farmer captures this shift. Old Master Bowen said the church tables forbid shearing sheep under Mars, but the almanac from London shows Mars in Cancer favors wool. We followed the print, and the fleeces were the fattest in memory. This grassroots trust in mass-produced knowledge didn't just break prediction monopolies, it seeded a far more dangerous idea. If the heavens could be read accurately without royal astrologers or papal decrees, what other truths might lie beyond the reach of authority? The answer, as we'll see, would come not from the stars, but from the hands of craftsmen building devices that could measure them without human bias. By the time Johannes Kepler inherited Tycho Brahe's celestial data in 1601, the parchment treaties that once governed astrology lay in tatters, not from lack of trying, but from their own impossible contradictions. For centuries, scholars had strained to force the heavens into legalistic frameworks, debating whether Mars in Aries meant war or agricultural renewal, as if cosmic truth could be settled by committee. But Kepler's calculations revealed a different reality. Planets moved in ellipses, not the perfect circles demanded by ancient celestial law, their speeds varying in precise mathematical relationships no treaty could legislate. This wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was the final verdict on astrology's failed legal codes. The shift wasn't instantaneous. Old habits clung like Ptolemaic epicycles. When Kepler first published his laws in 1609, the imperial diet in Regensburg condemned them as subversive to celestial order, while Venetian astrologers protested that elliptical orbits would render their zodiacal property claims meaningless. Yet the very rigidity that had once given astrological treaties their authority now hastened their collapse. Where Kepler's open-ended mathematics invited verification and refinement, the treaties' dogmatic pronouncements crumbled under the weight of their own exceptions. A telling incident occurred in 1612, when Galileo's telescopic observations of Jupiter's moons directly contradicted the Vatican's official star charts. Rather than admit error, church astronomers insisted the moons were optical illusions until independent observers across Europe confirmed their existence. The treaties had painted themselves into a corner where denying evidence became easier than revising dogma. Ironically, this crisis forged unexpected alliances. Former rivals like the Florentine Stellar Guild and the Proglunar Society, once divided by bitter disputes over Mercury's influence, now collaborated to test Kepler's theories. Their joint observations at the University of Padua in 1620 formed the nucleus of Europe's first scientific academies, where the old astrological factions reinvented themselves as champions of empirical inquiry. The Accademia del Cimento in Florence even adopted a motto that would have been heresy a generation earlier: provando e riprovando, attesting and retesting. Where treaties had demanded blind adherence, the new scientific method thrived on dissent. The legacy of these conflicts lingers in modern astronomy's deepest traditions. Peer review emerged directly from the sealed observation practices developed to prevent astrological tampering. The International Astronomical Union's strict naming conventions for celestial bodies descend from medieval attempts to standardize constellation borders. Even the Hubble Space Telescope's precise orbital calibrations owe a debt to the mechanical clocks built to sidestep treaty disputes over timekeeping. What began as a struggle to control the heavens ultimately liberated them, proving that cosmic truth needs no royal seals or papal approvals, only clear eyes and the courage to follow the evidence wherever it leads. The stars, it turns out, never needed interpreters, just witnesses. The same arguments that once echoed through medieval star chambers now resurface in the boardrooms of modern space agencies. Just swap parchment treaties for satellite frequency contracts. When international delegates gathered in 1967 to draft the Outer Space Treaty, they faced a dilemma eerily reminiscent of the Toledo Accord's collapse: how to share something no one truly owns. The treaty's declaration that celestial bodies are the province of all mankind directly mirrors 14th century astrologers' failed attempts to designate neutral zodiac zones. Even the terminology persists. Modern lawyers speak of orbital slots with the same territorial intensity that medieval scholars argued over Libra's influence. Consider the current battle over geostationary orbit real estate. Like the prized observation towers of Maragall and Cordoba, these high-altitude parking spots above the equator are limited in number but critical for global communications. The International Telecommunication Union's allocation system, where nations lobby for orbital positions much like Renaissance city-states jockeyed for eclipse prediction rights, has led to accusations of spectrum hoarding worthy of the starfish's sabotage schemes. In 2019, a Thai satellite operator accused a competitor of deliberately drifting into its assigned slot, recalling the medieval tactic of tilting quadrants to steal celestial data. The solution, a 21st century version of notarized observation logs, automated collision avoidance systems that track satellite movements with prison break precision. Asteroid mining rights expose even deeper parallels. When Luxembourg passed pioneering space resource laws in 2017, legal scholars immediately noted the resemblance to Alfonso X's decree claiming all celestial phenomena as royal property. Modern companies like Planetary Resources lobby for extraction rights using arguments lifted straight from 15th century merchant guilds that utilizing space resources constitutes improvement rather than theft. The opposing view, championed by the Moon Treaties supporters, echoes the Starry Guild's radical notion that the cosmos belongs to no earthly power. This debate came to a head in 2020 when NASA OSIRIS-REx mission collected asteroid samples, prompting China to file a diplomatic note questioning cosmic looting under international law, a phrase suspiciously similar to the Venetian star law's condemnation of celestial theft. Space junk regulation reveals the most poetic callback. Medieval laws punishing astrologers for falsifying star data find their counterpart in modern penalties for satellite operators who misreport orbital positions, creating navigation hazards. Dr. Eleni Georgiou, a space law historian at the Sorbonne, notes that the 17th century punishment for tampering with public eclipse records branding with Mercury's symbol directly inspired the bad actor tracking system used by today's space surveillance network. The parchment may have been replaced by algorithms, she observes, but the fundamental challenge remains how to govern the heavens when every player views the stars through a different lens. What connects these eras isn't just legal frameworks, but the timeless human impulse to project terrestrial conflicts onto the cosmos. Medieval kings saw zodiac signs as divine endorsements of their rule. Modern nations view satellite networks as extensions of sovereignty. The parchment treaties failed not because their goals were flawed, but because they underestimated the stars' refusal to conform to human legislation. As commercial lunar landings and Mars colonies loom, we're repeating history's oldest celestial mistake, believing the universe will respect the borders we draw across it. The real lesson from those crumbling medieval accords: the cosmos follows its own laws, and our agreements are only binding until the next supernova proves them obsolete. In the hushed laboratories of the Vatican archives, a team of historians huddles around an X-ray fluorescence scanner as it hums to life, revealing secrets inked then scraped away 7 centuries ago. The parchment before them, a tattered copy of the once-famed Bologna Concord, shows only faint traces of its original text under normal light. But as the scanner's beam traces each fiber, ghostly letters emerge, a clause demanding equal observation rights for Islamic and Christian astrologers, violently erased after the treaties collapsed. Lead researcher Dr. Isabella Conti adjusts her glasses, whispering, "They didn't just abandon this agreement, they tried to unwrite it from history." This isn't isolated detective work. Across Europe, scholars are combing monastery basements and digitizing palimpsests' manuscripts scraped clean and reused to reconstruct the lost legal frameworks of celestial governance. In Oxford, multispectral imaging exposed marginal notes in a 13th century psalter that reference a Council of the Fixed Stars, an undocumented summit where rival astrologers allegedly debated standardizing constellation boundaries. The notes, scribbled by a frustrated monk, complain that the council dissolved when the Parisians stormed out over Gemini's rightful place. Such fragments reveal how deeply medieval science was entangled with diplomacy and how fiercely its participants resisted compromise. One of the most startling discoveries came from a water-damaged ledger in a Toledo cathedral. Infrared photography revealed it was originally an astrologer's treaty draft, repurposed as an inventory of candle wax. The recovered text shows negotiators attempting to divide the zodiac into spheres of influence, assigning certain signs to Christian interpreters and others to Arabic scholars. A striking amendment, added then crossed out, proposes Libra as neutral territory, a celestial Switzerland where both traditions could coexist. Dr. Elias Fernandez, the Madrid-based historian who unearthed the document, notes the irony. They came closer to modern scientific collaboration than we realized, but ego kept tripping them up. One side insisted Virgo's wheat sheaf proved agricultural authority. The other saw it as a call to prayer. These rediscovered texts are overturning old assumptions about medieval astronomy's stagnation. Where historians once saw a period of rigid dogma, the new evidence paints a dynamic landscape of experimentation and debate, albeit one constantly undermined by politics. A recently decoded star chart from Krakow, for instance, shows meticulous corrections to Ptolemy's star positions based on observations made during the Mongol invasions, proving knowledge flowed along trade routes even during wartime. Another breakthrough came when scholars at the University of Padua matched chemical signatures in inks across 3 separate manuscripts, revealing they were all penned by the same itinerant scholar, a woman named Clara of Verona, who acted as a secret mediator between feuding astrological schools. The implications stretch beyond academic curiosity. Modern space lawyers now study these failed treaties when drafting lunar resource agreements, recognizing the same patterns of territorial thinking. NASA Historical Advisory Board even commissioned a report on the Toledo water-damaged ledger, noting how its spheres of influence model mirrors current debates over Mars exploration rights. As Dr. Conti slides another scanned folio under her machine, she muses on the timeless lesson emerging from the parchment. Every time humanity tries to legislate the cosmos, we learn the same hard truth. The stars refuse to be partitioned. But oh, how beautifully they fail. Centuries of celestial conflict left an unexpected legacy, not in the stars themselves, but in the scaffolding of rules humanity built to reach them. Those rival astrologers, squabbling over zodiac borders and eclipse predictions, were unknowingly drafting the blueprint for modern science. Every time a treaty collapsed like the Toledo Accord, crumbling under accusations of hidden comet data, it forced innovation. Instruments grew more precise to settle disputes, records became meticulous to prevent forgery, and the very act of debating planetary motions laid the groundwork for empirical observation. What began as superstition disguised as law gradually stripped away the mysticism, revealing the cold mechanics of the cosmos beneath. Consider the paradox. The more these scholars tried to control celestial interpretation through treaties and decrees, the more they proved how little control they actually had. When the Alfonsine tables were exposed as forged, it didn't just discredit a document, it shattered the illusion that truth could be owned. Kings branded astrologers as heretics for challenging official charts, only to watch those same charts fail during eclipses or comet appearances. The universe, indifferent to human legislation, kept unfolding according to its own rhythms, and in that humbling gap between prediction and reality, science found its footing. The echoes of these conflicts surround us today. Modern space law grapples with the same questions medieval scholars faced. Who owns a slice of the sky? How do we share finite resources like orbital slots or lunar landing sites? Even the terminology carries ancient baggage, celestial sovereignty. Debates mirror the Ophiuchus disputes, while satellite frequency allocations recall Venetian spice merchants arguing over eclipse-based shipping schedules. The key difference: we've traded parchment for policy, but the core challenge remains unchanged. Here's the lesson etched in those crumbling star charts: collaboration outlasts control. The treaties that failed were those demanding conformity, like the Paris Compromise's doomed attempt to silence war horoscopes. The ideas that endured, like Regiomontanus's Tower or the Starry Guild's encrypted manuscripts, flourished because they welcomed dissent. Today's greatest astronomical breakthroughs, from the James Webb Telescope's deep-field images to international asteroid deflection tests, thrive on that same principle. The stars were never meant to be claimed, only understood. So the next time you look up at the night sky, remember the astrologers who saw it as a battleground. Their wars seem quaint now, but their legacy is written in the very tools we use to explore the cosmos. What feud fascinates you most? Was it the Marrakech Observatories' brass instrument sabotage, or the clandestine stitch-coded horoscopes of medieval nuns? Drop your favorite celestial showdown in the comments, and if you're hungry for more, check out the sources below, because history's greatest irony is this: those who fought hardest to own the stars ended up giving them to everyone.